Hey guys, Shan this side, welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to cover refresh scope, and we have already seen centralized configuration. So you can say that this is the prerequisite. Okay, so kindly check it out if you haven't seen that. We have already done setup of this central config files, config server and order service. We have already done the setup of it. And we finished with asking one question that, hey, let's say our order application is running and someone has updated the central config for order service. Do I need to restart the app every time? What I mean is that during the application startup, this config server fetches the details from the config file and save it. Similarly, order service at the application startup time fetch the property and save it. Okay, but now when the application is already in the running mode and somebody changed this file, how it will get to know that something has been changed? Okay, so do we need to restart every time? For now, I can say that no, and its solution is @RefreshScope. But let's try to reproduce this scenario what we are talking here. So say everything is same what we have seen in the previous video. I have a central config. In the central config order service dev properties, currently it is this hello from order dev. Similar config server, I have set up this the same thing which we have set up before. You have dependency, you have added this annotation, you have added application.properties file properly. Okay, so this is also same, no change. And then order service also mostly same. You have the client config dependency, application.properties also same. Okay, the only difference I do here is that I am using @configuration_properties. If you remember from the previous video, we were having this. Okay, we were having this. So in the controller, order controller, we were reading the property like this from @value and the property name, which comes into this message, and we are using this, we are printing it here. Okay, but for this refresh scope, instead of using @value, I am using @configuration_properties. So we have also seen @configuration_properties in depth. So kindly check it out, like how to use it. Okay, but it's similar. Like it just take out the property, read the properties, and just convert it to Pojo. Okay, so check it out if you have any doubt with the configuration properties topic. So the same thing here, if you see that I have created one class order properties, and custom.message is our property name, right? So there we have custom.message. Custom.message is our property name. So prefix is custom and this field message. So custom.message. So that property will convert it to this Pojo. So it value is stored into this field. Okay. So one question might be coming at this place at your time, at your mind would be like, why we are using @configuration_properties for refresh scope? That I will tell you at end. Okay. When we will discuss the disadvantage of refresh scope, there I will clear you why I specifically use @configuration_properties. Okay, but for now there is no difference in the behavior. If you want to use @value, you can use it, you will also get the same output. If you want, you can use this @configuration_properties also, same output. Okay, the only thing is that inside this message field, this property get mapped. Custom.message within the application.properties mapped to this field. Okay, and this is just nothing but a getter setter. And I am using this order properties here, auto wired this, and now I am using this order property get message. Similarly, earlier in the controller itself, I have this @value and using this. Now since I have this separate class, okay, which is a Pojo of the property, now I have auto wired it and uses this fetching the property like this. Right, so everything mostly same like what we have done in previously. Now let's see. Now let's start all the server. I started the config server and order server. So my config server is started at 8888. My order server is started at 8080. So first thing I invoke is /order/fetch, this controller /order/fetch. So it will print fetch order and it will print the message of this property. So currently our environment is dev, right? So it will fetch this property, hello from order dev. So it will print hello from order dev, and currently counter is 1. We will also show you. So currently this counter value is of no use. I will show you like why I have added it. Okay, again in the end when we will see the disadvantage. Okay, so currently this is just for, you can say that no additional benefit here of adding the counter for now at this point of time. Okay, so first thing first here is that when we invoke the fetch endpoint, we are able to see that it is properly fetching the properties from the central config. Okay, now let's update the central config. Now I update this hello from order dev to hello from order dev. This is updated. So I change this message value. Now let's hit the order API again. I called /order/fetch. What you see? Fetch order and message hello from order dev, old only. It's reading the old property value only, even though the property value is changed in the central config repo. Okay, so this is the problem we are talking about. Until and unless you won't restart the order service again, you will see only the old value only. So how we can resolve it? RefreshScope can help to solve this. So what RefreshScope does? So this annotation help to mark the bean which need to be destroyed and recreated, or you can say that which need to be dynamically refreshed. So when we are saying that, hey, it's refresh, actually it is doing two things. It is first destroy the bean and it create a new bean, okay, with the latest value. So now see this example. In the order properties, right, where I have the configuration. So this is my actually the property custom dot message. This is the property, right, custom dot message. So custom dot message will get ultimately mapped to this field. Okay, so now, and this is a bean @ component. So now I have marked @refreshScope here. So when I use @refreshScope over this bean, I am telling Spring Boot that this bean add order properties, say in this scenario, I am allowing it to dynamically refresh. Okay, and dynamically refresh means whenever the refresh happens, it will destroy the bean first, old bean first, and it will recreate a new one with the latest value. Okay, and how that refresh will happen? Okay, it will happen, one way is through Actuator. Okay, so if you have not seen the Actuator video before, kindly check it out, because this approach which I am going to tell you is use this Actuator functionality. So here, if you remember, if you recall from the Actuator video, there is something called custom Actuator endpoint. Like we can create our custom endpoint through @endpoint annotation. Okay, so the same thing Spring Cloud Config has been used. So Spring Cloud Config has used this property @endpoint. So here, if you see, this is the framework code of the Spring Cloud Config. So they have a class refresh endpoint, and they have used this @endpoint refresh. So means they have exposed one endpoint /actuator/refresh, and internally here, if you see, they have one write operation. So I told you, right, we have already seen that in the Actuator, what's write operation. So it's a post kind of an endpoint. Okay, so when it is called with the post, this method will get invoked, and what it does, it try to refresh. So it has logic that if it is running within a config server, then it fetches the property from the central config. If this refresh endpoint which has been invoked, if this is running inside a config client like order service, it will do two things. It will first invoke the config server, fetch the property, and then look for @refreshScope beans, okay, and then recreate them with the fresh property value. Okay, so you can say that it depends on the context where we are invoking this endpoint. If you are invoking this endpoint at config server, then config server task is to fetch it will do refresh is like fetch it from the central config. And if you are invoking this endpoint in the client like order, it will call server, config server first, fetch the endpoint, and then all the beans which are marked with refresh scope, it will recreate them. That it will do. Okay, so quickly again is that @refreshScope only task is to mark the bean which need to be dynamically refreshed, or dynamically refreshed means the old bean will get destroyed and new bean will get created with the latest value. Okay, and when the dynamic refresh will happen, okay, some refresh event has to be happen, and when that refresh event will happen, we have to invoke an endpoint in case we are using the actuator approach. Okay, and which endpoint actuator exposes? So Spring Cloud config has exposed this /actuator/refresh, and it does the refresh, or you can say that it creates the refresh event. If the refresh event happens within a config server, you know that config server task is to fetch from the, here we can see that config server task is to fetch from the central config. So that refresh will do. If you are invoking the refresh at order service, its task is to call the config server, fetch it, and all the beans which are marked with @refreshScope, delete it and create a new one. Let's see that here now with an example. Okay, now what to do that? All we need to do is add the actuator dependency. So in config server, we have to add an actuator dependency. So in we have already seen that POM. We have already have the config server dependency. All we are adding is actuator dependency. Okay, and you know that from the actuator video, whenever there is an endpoint, we have to expose it. If we are planning to use any actuator endpoint, we have to expose it. So I'm just exposing it. Management.endpoint.web. This endpoint I have to expose. Refresh. Okay. You might be thinking what I am doing here, why I am going faster, because we have already seen this in the actuator video. Everything is same. Okay. So we are just exposing the refresh endpoint. Okay. That's all we have to do in the config server. Similarly, in the order microservice, we already have the dependency for the config client. All we have to add is dependency for the actuator, and also we have to expose the refresh endpoint because we are going to invoke /actuator/refresh here also. Okay, and here I mark the bean which I need to dynamically refresh. So here this order property bean I want to dynamically refresh, so that's why I marked it with @refreshScope. Okay, and no change in the controller. So controller exposes /order/fetch endpoint. Now let's see that I started the server again. Okay, so first central config has this changes, order-service-dev.property. Current value is hello from order dev. Okay, so this is the value currently present. Okay, now I started the config server 8888. I started the order server at 8080. Now first I invoke /order/fetch. Okay, it fetch the property properly from the central config. Hello from order dev. counter is 1. So you know that every time you hit, by default every class is single, every bean is singleton. So whenever you hit multiple times, this counter I'm just incrementing it just for proper visualization. So when you hit /order/fetch, it properly fetch the property from the central config. Okay, so here our currently central config has this hello from order dev. So it properly fetch it. Now I am updating the property in the central config. So I change it from hello from order dev to hello from order dev. This is updated to test RefreshScope. So I just change it. Now I am hitting the order API again /fetch. So here if you see again the old value hello from order dev. So you might be saying, hey Shreyansh, now we have implemented, now we have annotated our bean with RefreshScope. We have added the Actuator dependency. Why now it is coming as old? See, till now we have not invoked the refresh event, and refresh event will occur when we invoke this endpoint. Okay, so now I am first invoking the endpoint on config server, and this is the Actuator endpoint, right, which is Spring Cloud config exposed /Actuator/refresh. So I am first invoking it on cloud config server. So when I did this, it got success. What it does, it calls the central config and fetch the latest value. Now it fetch this latest value. Our config server goes to the central config, now fetch the latest property values. Okay, so now my config server is refreshed. Now the same API I am invoking on the order service. So now this is 8080 is my for order service. I am invoking /Actuator/refresh. Now here if you see that, it shows the list of, you can say that the messages which are refreshed, which it has fetched. Okay, so custom.message is the endpoint, right? This custom.message, because it has been changed. So it shows that 200, it properly refresh this property value. Okay, and notice that this is the post operation. Why post operation? Because in the framework, if you see there, it uses the write operation. That's why it is post. Okay, and this endpoint /Actuator/refresh, we don't have to create it. Already Spring Cloud config does it for us. All we have to do is that add the Actuator dependency and expose this refresh endpoint and just invoke it to refresh it. Okay, so now my order service is also refreshed. Now after this, now you call /order/fetch. Now you will see that you will get a updated value. Hello from order dev, this is updated to test RefreshScope. Okay, so now it dynamically updated without even restarting the application. So counter value is 3. Okay, so I have not restarted it. Okay, so I just hit it again, and if you see that, it's dynamically updated. So it's clear. So how we are dynamically updating with the help of Actuator endpoint. Now let's come back to the point where, like we told, like I am using configuration properties. Why? I told you that when I'm saying that dynamically refresh, it does two things. It destroys the bean and recreate it. So when the old bean is destroyed, you will lose all the object state. All the work you have done on that object, that gone. So that's why it's never recommended to use RefreshScope over controller service. It's not safe. Okay, so you know that from the like I've already covered this at the configuration properties topic. So you know that this, on whichever the Pojo class, we have write this at the configuration properties, or you can say that in another term, at the configuration properties is a Pojo which only contains configuration. So it's stateless. Only properties are there. Okay, so this is safe. Even it is dynamically refreshed, means it is destroyed, old object, old bean is destroyed and new bean is created. It's stateless. Okay, so that is okay, that is safe. And you can understand this with example. Let's say now if I use refresh scope over a controller class, now see what happens. Why I use configuring properties, right? Why I use configuration properties. Now let's say the old way, in the order controller itself I have put refresh scope, and you know that earlier in the central configuration video we were using this, reading the property file like @value and using this message here, and I have a counter here just for the better visualization. Now I am using, notice that I am using refresh scope over this controller. Okay, now first time you call @fetch /fetch, so it will properly fetch the endpoint hello from order dev properly. Okay, counter is 1. Now second time I am calling, counter is, notice that counter is 2, and same hello from order dev. Okay, currently I am not changing anything into the central config, but I invoke the refresh endpoint at the order service. Now what the refresh endpoint do, /actuator/refresh, now I am calling it at the client, the configuration client. So it does two things. First, fetch from config server. Second, refresh bean with @refresh scope. Okay, so first it will try to fetch from the config server like all the new value, so it fetch it, and second thing is like it will try to update all the beans which are marked with @refresh scope. Okay, so now when I have done this, so currently you see empty here because here the old value and the new value is same, so no updation happen. But again internally it has destroyed the old bean, created the new one, but the value is same, it is not updated, right? So that's why you see empty. I haven't changed the centralized central config this property value, but it follow the proper sequence. First it might have called config server, fetch it, and then it will dynamically refresh, means it deleted the old bean of which one? Now the old bean of order controller, because refresh scope is used on top of this bean. So its object is old object, old bean is destroyed. It will create a new bean with the new values. Okay, so now when you try to invoke @fetch endpoint again, okay, so currently you will see the same value because I haven't updated it, but all I wanted to show is that see the counter value. So counter value was 2. Now if you are invoking it again, it changed to 1. Why? Because when you have done refresh, it deleted the old object, old bean, and created a new, fresh. Okay, and you know that by default beans are singleton, so it should goes to 3 from 2. Okay, but it creates a new object, that's why it is starting with 1, and that's why that's the reason I used @configuration_properties for the refresh scope. I don't want to have a recommend even this that use refresh scope over the controller or service layer. Never, right? Because let's say your controller class is taking a request and suddenly somebody calls this /actuator/refresh, that bean is destroyed, your request will be dropped. Okay, so again very important in interview also, never use @refresh scope over a controller or service. Always used over stateless object or stateless bean like a Pojo, which is like for configuration, right? And one such is like @configuration properties. This is nothing but a Pojo for configuration only. It's stateless. It just have configuration properties, fields and values. Okay. Now, one last question might have comes to your mind. If you can think of it, pause it and think it. What could be that question? I'll tell you. Now, till now, what we have seen that, okay, Shreyansh, what we understood is that we have a central config file, we have a config server, and we have different client like order service. Let's say there are hundreds of microservices. Now, if I have to dynamic refresh config server without restarting this, I invoke actuator /refresh. Okay. Now, once this is refreshed, all these clients need to be refreshed too. So I need to invoke /actuator /refresh on all these hundreds of microservices. If we are using this approach, /actuator approach, yes, we have to call on all these 100. But yes, there is a different approach too. In that approach, we only need to refresh the config here. And once the refresh happen here, it will publish, you can say that event or message to all the clients that, hey, the configuration is updated. You guys also update yourself. That can be happen through Spring Cloud Bus. Okay, that we will see next. So you can say that is another way of making a refresh event occur. Okay, so you know that it's a two-step. We have to mark the bean, and we have to mark the bean which need to be dynamically refreshed, and the marking of the bean happen to RefreshScope. Now, whenever the refresh event happens, all the beans which are marked as @RefreshScope, that will get refreshed. Okay, so now this refresh event can happen through Actuator /refresh endpoint, which we have seen already, and another is through Spring Cloud Bus. That's it for today. If you have any doubt, let me know. We can discuss further. Bye.